agreement to hold 32 countries accountable for their climate emissions, which are impacting on the lives of the 6 young applicants who we're supporting in bringing this case. And in court today, we heard states really concentrate on technicalities. They were trying to have the case dismissed without ever having their own policies scrutinized by the court. But I think it was also a really amazing opportunity to reiterate the concrete impacts these young people are experiencing. So we're talking about heat extremes that interfere with basic things like exercise, spending time outdoors, sleep, concentration, increasing heat waves in Portugal. It's a very climate vulnerable country, and we're seeing huge increases in mortality and morbidity. And at the same time, the other thing we witnessed today in court were the countries trivializing these things, saying there's a lot of predictions, we don't know, borderline climate denialism.
Your clients are all from Portugal. What's motivating them? Can you tell me about a few of the clients?
They're from 2 different families. Some of them were in school when they first started this, others have started work. And they've been building this diligently over the last 6 years. We first engaged with these young people after the 2017 wildfires, which unfortunately resulted in many deaths. And they saw firsthand the devastation that was being wrought on their region, where climate change was deepening the impacts of these fires and their frequency. And these fires came right up to their towns. They were covered in ash, and it was quite a shock. And they realized that summer on summer, this was only getting worse. They just lived through another temperature-setting summer, and they wanted to do something about it. Otherwise, their future would be one which would be unlivable. And today was a momentous day. They've achieved a lot by standing steadfast.
As you well know, there are thousands of climate cases out there, though this is one of the biggest. Why do you think this has potential to have a big impact?
It's before a court that has jurisdiction over in excess of 47 countries, I believe, within the Council of Europe. And this case is against the major emitters. So really we're talking about a significant chunk of global emissions in the first case. It's also a highly influential court, which could influence the decisions of other international bodies and national courts, especially those in Europe, which would equip them to go further in addressing the climate crisis.
And what do the young people at the center of this case have to prove to make the court rule in their favor?
We're able to show that there's a direct causal connection between the emissions of these 32 countries and direct climate change impacts that they're experiencing. So proving their victim status is a key element of this, and also proving that they fall within the jurisdiction of the 32 states by virtue of these emissions.
Now, I know there was a somewhat similar case brought before a different EU court back in 2018 that was thrown out because the plaintiffs couldn't make the case that they were specifically impacted by climate change in a way that was different from anyone else, I gather. Why do you think that this case might end differently?
I think this might end differently because of the extreme vulnerability of the region in which these young people are located. So the harm is very specific, identifiable, and each of them have different characteristics. One is a bronchoasthmatic, another has certain allergies, conditions which are exacerbated by the climate crisis. And I think we also have a good degree of foresight on the parts of the governments. There's a deep understanding amongst these governments about the impact of climate change and how fossil fuel emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, are contributing to them. Moreover, we've also presented evidence about how feasible it is for the governments to change course. So we've said the governments can do more, but they're choosing not to. So this raises questions for the states. They know the harms, they know they're creating harms, they're contributing directly to them, but they're choosing not to take a different path. If we remain on course and we go to 3 degrees of warming, all of Europe will be impacted and everyone will have victim status. So I think it becomes a question of, if not now, when will the governments act?
Gerard O'Queen is the director of the Global Legal Action Network. He's been speaking to us from Strasbourg, France. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
2 months ago, you might remember hearing about this, a U.S. soldier sprinted across a heavily fortified border into North Korea. The last thing heard from Army Private Travis King was his laughter. Today, North Korea released King. And for more on this story, we turn to Jenny Town. She's the director of 38 North, the publication from the Stimson Center think tank that focuses on North Korea. Jenny, what do we know about why North Korea is releasing Travis King today?
Well, we don't know a lot. There is some things that we can kind of surmise from all of this. What we've been able to piece together of this story is that he had actually been arrested in South Korea, served a little bit of jail time for assault for like a bar fight or something, and was being sent back to the US for disciplinary action. And then instead of getting on the plane, somehow made it back to the city, got on a tour to the DMZ, and then while he was in the joint security area, ran to the north. The initial readouts from the North Korean interviews of him as to why he said he was going, he did talk about feeling a lot of discrimination in the U.S. Army. He was a soldier, he is a soldier, second-class private, and sort of, disillusionment with the United States and with the U.S. Army. That's what we've been able to piece together. How accurate that is, we just don't know.
Does it strike you as unusual that North Korea released this prisoner relatively quickly? It sounds like you're saying you did not expect them to hold him for very long because there isn't much precedent for this, but it was only about 2 months.
Yeah, no, I think there were many of us in the community that thought he might have been returned even sooner. I think some of even the delay of why it took 2 months, I think there was some level of quarantine that happened that delayed the process, and then there was the high-level visits also going on of Russian and Chinese officials into North Korea that I think, took precedence over dealing with Private King's case. But yeah, for a lot of us who work on North Korea issues, there just didn't seem to be a lot of potential value to the North Koreans that Private King offered. He wasn't like a high-level military asset. He, didn't have a super compelling soldier story. This seems like a lot of liability for them to accept him with very little payoff at a time when there's already fragile relations going on. So I think a lot of us expected him to be returned relatively quickly.
You mentioned fragile relations. Is there anything in the current U.S.-North Korea relationship at the moment that sheds light on why King was in fact released?
Well, there's not much going on between the U.S. and North Korea these days in terms of actual diplomacy. We haven't been in formal talks since 2019. The U.S. has been offering talks about denuclearization several times since Biden came into office, and then the North Koreans have rejected that over and over and over. But there has been still contact, pretty regular contact between United Nations Command and the North Koreans, just to check in and, if there's at least one channel of communication that's still open. And the UNC did sort of take the lead on this because it did happen in the demilitarized zone. There isn't really much going on, but at the same time, this wasn't an issue that was worth agitating relations any further.
Jenny Town is the director of 38 North, a publication from the Stimson Center that focuses on North Korea. Jenny, thanks for all of this.
Thanks, Carolyn. It was great.
South Sudan has been an independent country for only a dozen years after a long civil war. But the country is now celebrating a big moment. It's sending the national basketball team, the Bright Stars, to the Olympics. The World's Africa correspondent Halima Gakandi has our story.
Growing up as a South Sudanese refugee in Minnesota, Anunwa Omot would gaze at the fire station across the street from his home and dream about becoming a fireman. Olympic athlete, though, never, he tells me. But clearly fate has other plans for him, because the Olympics is where he and South Sudan's national basketball team are headed next summer. The Bright Stars national team is headed to Paris. Earlier this month, they clinched a spot at the Olympics after a series of wins at the FIBA Basketball World Cup. For a team that was just established a few years ago, this has brought both jubilation and some shock, Omot tells me.
For me, honestly, I've been overwhelmed with everything that's happened and how it's happened. For me, it's just, it's a blessing just to be able to be in this situation.
Omot's basketball journey began in high school. It clicked for him, and he decided to try going professional. But the years since have been rocky, and he said as many people doubted him. Things changed a few years ago, though, when he got a call from legendary retired NBA All-Star Luol Deng, who's also originally from South Sudan.
It was a no-brainer when he called and mentioned what he had planned and what he wanted to do, how he seen it unfolding.
Deng's vision was to bring together South Sudanese